You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Kivelevitz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. You've bought your tickets. The ushers are about to open the doors. Yes, the Projectionist has Semicha is about to start. But first, if you own a retail business and accept credit cards, your customers are getting points, miles, and all sorts of rewards every time they use their card. And you're paying the price. That's why NRS Pay, a product of National Retail Solutions, a division of the IDT Corporation, offers its cash discount program Fee-Buster. You can start accepting credit cards for free. If your business processes over $18,000 a month, you pay no monthly fee and $0 out of your pocket for transaction. This means you, as a retailer, can enjoy the benefits of accepting plastic, and your customers still get those crucial miles they crave and need. NRS Pay Fee-Buster provides every client with a free credit card reader with no long-term contract, no early termination fee, cancel anytime without a penalty. I'm personally familiar with this company, and they truly stand by their product, and they'll help you with live, stateside-based customer service on any issue or question. Visit nrspay.com or call 833-289-2767 to learn more about NRS Pay and the fantastically fair Fee-Buster. The Isles, the Projectionist. That's Semicha. I'm here with Rabbi Kolakowski. You want to start today memorializing and telling our listeners about the incredible life and work of Bert I. Gordon and his accomplishments as a director, a writer, a producer, and
special effects man.
Yes. So tell us a little bit, give us the thumbnail sketch here, and why we should take note of his passing.
Since I'm a child, I've had an appreciation for his films. It was, when I think probably the first one I saw was Beginning of the End, which I think was the third movie that he directed. It had Peter Graves, who's always a favorite of mine. We talked about
Peter Graves. Okay.
We talked about
a man of of great range, indeed.
So I just remember on AMC seeing this movie, Beginning of the End, with giant grasshoppers.
You were introduced to Bert Gordon's oeuvre from the film The Beginning of the End, which is
that's probably my favorite of his movies. It might not be his best work, but it's something that's certainly an entertaining little movie. It's not let
me read the synopsis here. That there's a reporter, a military officer, and a scientist, and they discover the complete destruction of a small town that was caused by giant grasshoppers that were accidentally enlarged by the scientists experimenting with radioactive material at a nearby agricultural research project. So what Bert does over here, and of course, as you mentioned, it has the incomparable Peter Graves as Dr. Wainwright. He's the scientist. I see.
Yeah. He delivers one line that was later in the movie with called Matt. There was a movie in 1993, Matinee, that Joe Dante made with John Goodman, and he says, you can't. And they made a lot of references to a lot of these old movies, and one of the lines was from that. You can't drop an atom bomb on Chicago. That was
written by one of our tribe. Fred Freeberger was the writer on that film. I'm sure it really pushed his creative juices to the brink to come up with this plot. And I think what you were so enraptured by was the way the grasshoppers were shot. I mean, basically he just did close-ups of regular grasshoppers, right?
Right. And it was actually a very interesting story of how he had to get permission to have these particular species of grasshoppers. He was only allowed to have males in order to make sure that there wasn't some kind of a invasion of locusts all over the wherever they were filming this movie. But I felt that having real animals looked more real. Like I know that them, which this movie obviously was inspired by at some level, was very successful movie that was, I guess, 3 years earlier. And even you look at the poster, and it's kind of ripping off the poster for them. That movie was much more critically acclaimed, and it had these large puppets for giant ants. And somehow, to me, I thought seeing actual grasshoppers, made to look big, really, was something that was more realistic in a sense than just having.
But the question is, how could he match it? How could he match it by the double exposure onto the buildings they were supposed to be climbing, interacting with with the human actors? I mean, it's always a question, obviously how.
I mean, he did it. He learned the craft over the years, because if you see, his first movie, which was one that I'd seen many, many times. I mean, 8 of his movies were featured on Mystery Science Theater 3000. Mm-hmm. And all of those
Marco,
distinction.
I don't know.
Right. Well, you have the attack of the puppet people, of course, right?
That he said was, even though when we asked him at Monster Bash what his favorite movie was, he said all of them. But he writes in his autobiography that Attack of the Puppet People was, to him, one of his most interesting films. There was no attack, though. The attack of part was kind of, I think, just to sensationalize the title. But that had John Agar.
Right, and John Agar is sort of, even in the 50s, John Agar, I think, stood a little bit above, in terms of a known personality, than Peter Graves. Again, the thing is the trick photography. They basically, what happens is very similar to some of the special effects in The Incredible Shrinking Man, where you have everybody is shrunk to a diminutive size, right? And then you basically.
Yeah, I mean, this was again, just like Beginning of the End was a, I wouldn't say a ripoff, but it was to cash in on the success of them. And then he and Earth versus the Spider was probably to cash in on the success of Tarantula, which did use a real tarantula. And then and now the Attack of the Puppet People was to cash in on the success of The Incredible Shrinking Man, which also used a real tarantula. So you had all, he knew what he was working on. He knew what worked, what was popular, and he used that. He said, he described that it was since he was a small child, he was interested in movies, going to the movies, making his own, little movies on a 16 millimeter camera, and then going on. And I think that's kind of what drew me in. It's like, oh, maybe when I was a little kid, I was like, maybe I could do something like this. Maybe I could, get some of my pet iguana and take pictures with some toys and make it look like. And I never had a camera that I could do that, but I remember I had a still camera. One of the things I think in 5th grade or 6th grade, we were being taught how to develop pictures and stuff, and I took a picture of a bullfrog next to a toy car or something and developed that.
No, it's interesting. Of course, he comes back, even in the 70s, where, there clearly had been 20 years, I suppose, of technological advancements in producing monster flicks. You have Empire of the Ants, right? Where
and Food of the Gods. He went back to that same style again, meaning throughout the 60s he went away more from the monster movies. He really only made the Village of the Giants, maybe could be, which was also based on Food of the Gods, maybe could be, not really, it's more of a comedy, but mostly he did the supernatural thrillers, and he did some other action and adventure movies, and
a number of X-rated films he decided to make as well. I think we should, I know we're not trying to give him a Jewish eulogy, but it sounds like he was very, very active. It sounds like he never thought of himself as any great auteur or as making any important statements. He wanted to give people entertainment, and gave.
That's the one thing that's interesting about him, because he's kind of somewhat overshadowed, by Ed Wood and Roger Corman, Roger Corman's still around. But I think Roger Corman of all of them is sometimes trying to make statements here and there. I mean, the only statement possibly that I've seen in any of his films was in Beginning of the End, that here you had the scientist trying to save the world with some technology that wound up going awry. But more than that, it was he really wasn't making any statements. But he worked with big people. He worked with Orson Welles. He worked with Kirk Douglas. He worked actually Kirk Douglas. He worked with him making a commercial for that was
father a child in his second marriage. I don't think in his second marriage his children are Jewish, Eva Marie Markelstrofer, but his first wife Flora
who worked with him. She helped him out with a lot of special effects. She's credited in a lot of his movies as a
right. And I of course knew when you mentioned to me Susan Gordon, and we did a brief look right before we started recording. Of course, I remembered her in one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes with J. Pat O'Malley, The Fugitive, where this caretaker, old guy, that's somehow helping these kids, I think in the orphanage. Turns out that he's a intergalactic space alien that is being chased. I think it's a Charles Beaumont special, and she is cute as a button, and she was very, very charming. And we mentioned she actually is sort of the heroine of the Attack of the Puppet People.
Yeah, and it was an accident that they had someone else casted for the role who couldn't make it. So then he brought his daughter Susan in to cover for that, and
she has quite a little bit of a career.
She worked with Danny Kaye. She worked with. Unfortunately, she passed away more than a decade before her father. And she, I don't know how close they were, but he writes in his autobiography that in 2006 he came to our favorite convention, Monster Bash, which I had met him after that. I met him at I think the last Monster Bash he came to. But he mentioned that what it meant to him to spend that time with his daughter at the convention, and like we mentioned, she was a very chashuv from person, who really did a lot for Yiddishkeit, did a lot for Klal Yisrael. Her with her husband together, first in Japan, they were pretty much the leaders of the Frum community in Tokyo, and then they settled in Teaneck, close to 40 years ago, and they really were. It seems like
helped really spawn the Teaneck into the Mecca of modern Orthodox Judaism that it is today.
Yeah, pretty much 3 or 4 of the shuls that are big shuls now in Teaneck started in their basement.
Yeah, well, look, if you're in Hollywood and if you've been making films, I guess you might pick up the bug to think big. Bug and big is the main thing here, and she definitely she definitely was. I guess she took that leadership role that a director, producer, writer like her dad modeled for her. Whether she was close to him or not, we can only speculate. But again, I think
that Monster Bash brought them back together before she passed away. He writes that he's thankful to Ron Adams for bringing them together for that event, and that was.
Look, she was definitely very active in child roles in Ben Casey and as well. And in My Three Sons, she actually came in. I think she actually played 4 different parts in My Three Sons. And I think that that is a great legacy. Really, it's unfortunate that he had to see her pass away before him, but it sounds like, as he says in one of his quotes, he says, "Look, I want the people to scream when the spider shows up." That's the hana that he has.
Yeah, and he a lot of his movies became very, the one scene in Earth versus the Spider where there's the spider attacks the city, the little town that he's attacking, and then the woman gets her dress caught in the car door and she can't get out. That was used in many commercials and all kinds of things. It really became an iconic scene. He was able to, with very little, accomplish a lot. He learned how to direct. He learned how to he writes about working with Orson Welles, about how Orson Welles' agent was warning him, don't mention Citizen Kane and don't work him too hard. He doesn't show up before 10 a.m. He doesn't leave after 4 p.m. And but he said that Wells was so impressed with just how nice he was and everything that he wound up in the end saying, don't worry what my agent says. Whenever you need me, I'm here. And they worked well together, and
So
others.
tell me, listen, obviously, all of our listeners can check Bert out on IMDb and find films. What would you say if there's going to be one, your favorite Bert Gordon film? Which one would it be?
Like I said, my favorite is definitely Beginning of the End, but all of his stuff from the 50s are my favorites. That's really, including the
Okay.
including King Dinosaur, which was his first directing film, which Puppet People is really a lot of fun. It's different. Earth versus Fire, the Amazing Colossal Man, and the sequel, War of the Colossal Beast. Those are both some of probably his most successful movies of the 50s. The Cyclops is another favorite because it has Lon Chaney Jr. He said, how nice it was working with Chaney. And also it also has all the big monsters. I like that one. That one's a little bit harder to find. But one thing I like about that one is that it has many more different monsters, whereas most of his movies kind of just had one thing. That one had 5 or 6 or 7 different animals that he was able to use in that movie. The plot isn't maybe that great, but the special effects are just fun. There's just something to me about seeing those big lizards and things and running
well,
around.
As you said, I think he has the distinction, although this is not a program I'm that familiar with. You've mentioned a number of times here on our show, Mystery Science Theater. I think his films have been shown more than any on Mystery Science Theater, which shows you, I guess, that you can have fun making fun of them as well. Greatest film of all time, even above The Searchers, which we've talked about here, is Singin' in the Rain, Stanley Donen and Gene Kelly's musical, which I was talking to my good friend Jakob Friedman, and we're talking about standing the test of time. And he posited to me that films like The Godfather, even Bonnie and Clyde and others, he even mentioned that this year's Academy Award winner, which I happen to have seen, Everything Everywhere All at Once, he believed that these films in many ways speak about their time, speak about that moment, capture for people years from now, or now even looking at those films as iconic, indicative of what was the issues and what messages Hollywood or the directors wanted to send out. But he said there's certain films that did not win Oscars necessarily, but hold up incredibly well. And he mentioned to me that he took his young children to see Singin' in the Rain, and they were mesmerized. They loved it. And I've been working through a bout of some difficult aches and pains and stuff, and inability to sleep. I said, you know what? Let me watch a little bit of Singin' in the Rain. I've seen it probably about 20 times, and I was thinking about it. And I have some observations. I don't know if you've seen a film that many believe is the greatest Hollywood musical. I would say. And I know, Yitzchak, you're not a fan of musicals. They don't really make sense to you. But as someone when I was Shlomi's age, I couldn't get enough of them. And I would imagine myself doing the dance steps and being involved with that full orchestra, whether it was MGM or Warner's, whoever was behind it, and, sliding and slipping and moving and pirouetting and the ballet moves, and perhaps even fantasizing of the dance partners that I might have, whether they be Sid Charisse or Ginger Rogers. The musicals, and part of what Singing in the Rain is the origin story of musicals, and to basically tell over the obvious, the Freed unit in MGM. That was headed by Arthur Freed. Freed had control and access to a number of songs that he had written together with his partner. And these songs were prominent, including Singin' in the Rain and others throughout the early talkie era. What the idea was that these songs could now, in beautiful Technicolor, be staged in different numbers using all these songs like Good Morning and For You, Singin' in the Rain, of course, and putting them together in some sort of cohesive plot. And this, of course, took Comden and Green, Adolph Comden and Betty Arthur Freed tapping the incredible team of Betty Comden and Adolph Green, try to create some sort of plot structure. And you would say it's all just an excuse to get the songs done and the numbers happening. But there might be something a little bit stronger there than that. And what they came up with was, why don't we have the drama of the film be about the move from silent films to talkies, and who was able to make the transition and who could not make the transition, and why they wouldn't be able to make the transition, but do it in a sort of a fun sort of way. You're not necessarily mentioning the type of silent actors who we've talked about, Yitzchak, of course, who went into decline and were shunted out of the studio because of the sort of disdain everyone had for the craft of many of the silent experts and silent masters. This film did not have that type of pathos in it. It wasn't meant to be melancholy. Let me say it again. It was meant to be a light satire of what Hollywood was. And I do believe that there was probably certain characters in the film, especially, the Lena character, Lena Lamont, who was really played to the hilt by Jean Hagen. Jean Hagen plays her as a silly, vindictive, dumb blonde from New York. And she does a great job. I would say that, you even get a little bit of sympathy for her at the end. Jean Hagen's character was the only character that was nominated for an Academy Award in this film. She didn't win. But if you look at the film again, and I've seen it so many times, but watching it again, her performance is really a great standout. She is the silent screen star who you think is a bubblehead, but realizes as this move is happening that her role is in peril. It turns out that the idea is that the only way she's going to survive is if somebody is going to lip sync for her, and there's going to have to be someone else's voice singing and speaking for her. But she still has the presence and the adulation of a community. And now that she's making the turn into talkies, she wants to keep holding on to that. There's something in a way that isn't pernicious and evil about her. You really feel for her. And you realize that in a way, part of the reason why she is who she is because of how she's been used by the Nacian studios in trying to create their early stars of silent film, and how much they used the physical presence and the looks and the over-affected mannerisms. Part of what the film, the criticism the film laces is that much of the silent era, there was mugging. It wasn't true acting. It was more like paintings coming to life. And therefore, it wasn't really truly relatable in many ways. Or maybe perhaps it was. The film doesn't really give much credit to what was happening in terms of the effectiveness of the silent actors. It pays homage to the stunt work that was being done, that was incredible and, of course, death-defying at the time. And the film, as my friend Yaakov Friedman says, he thinks it's really about the fact that what survived into the talking era and thrived was the movement. Obviously, masters that we mentioned before, like Keaton and Lloyd and Chaplin, were able to fill the screen with these frenetic images that were greater than some of the stilted dialogue. But the reason that the talkies that thrived were the talkies that were able to tap for the first time dancing, that movement that was not necessarily the type of dairy-do of Douglas Fairbanks and others, but actually that movement fine-tuned, honed into numbers that can now be listened to. And that's why, the 30s created these stars like Fred Astaire. And really the film, although Gene Kelly was really after that period, he really only shows up in the 40s, but the film is in a way a testament to Gene Kelly himself. It was Gene Kelly had directed the film together with Stanley Donen, but as my friend Yaakov Friedman pointed out to me in a conversation that we had yesterday, he believes that Kelly was never shy about pushing his own ideas onto what a film should be. And it's clear to him that even in earlier films, whether it's Anchors Away or others, that Kelly was probably, in many ways, suggesting very strongly to whatever director was officially credited how the film should look. Now, both of these men, and we talk about Astaire and Kelly, Astaire made a film a year or so later than Singing in the Rain called The Bandwagon. And Astaire made that film, The Bandwagon, which many feel is also the apex or the greatest of the Hollywood musicals. And that's, so you really have Kelly and Astaire in, possibly their greatest, many people will say is one of the greatest musicals of all time. You have others who will throw in with Singin' in the Rain. And the difference might be between these two men. Astaire was incomparable in how he was able to move. He, in many ways, is more fluid and more inventive than Kelly. But Kelly, somehow, as my friend Yaakov pointed out, you can't keep your eyes off of him. He's got a certain acrobatic power. And even in his, when he's doing standard dance moves, he encourages the complete embracing of the film, whereas Fred Astaire, he's so graceful, he's so powerful in terms of the emotion that seems to come out of him as a dancer, and Kelly is really more like a roller coaster ride, and yet Kelly is his what he does, I think, swoops you up in memory more. It's hard to explain. It's almost like I wish I could dance like Astaire, but Kelly sort of took me on a dance with him. And I think that's what you see. One of the things I did when I was watching it was I went back to the screenplay that survives. And of course, screenplays are always skeletal in many ways, or sometimes they're overdone with too many details that the director realizes they needed to cut for time reasons. And I looked at the screenplay description of the famous dance scene in the rain that Kelly does, which is so many people have seen. Even Yitzchak has seen that clip of him actually jumping into the puddles. And the shooting screenplay of it is so sparse that you realize that what Kelly came up with, and it isn't a deep idea, but it's really the idea of having spirit, love, confidence, despite everything that's going on around you. I'm singing in the rain, right? Let the stormy clouds chase everyone from the place. Bring on the rain. There's a smile on my face, right? I'll walk down the rain with a happy refrain, right? Now, even though things are negative, even though there's many, many things to worry about, there might be health and other issues, there might be war that was happening other places, but I have a positivity which is beyond. And that's part of the reason why we go to the movies, right? We go to the movies to escape despite everything else. And even though we cannot nudge out completely that rain that's everywhere, we're going to keep on singing. And perhaps even singing despite and because of the difficulties. And Kelly does that in that number, because as the rain is coming down, and he sort of has some trepidation, but as he closes the umbrella, as he waltzes around the gutter spout, where you have not only the drops, but you have the rain that is gathered and is coming down in molten lava-like intensity. At first, Kelly perhaps wants to avoid it, but as you see the scene, you see he actually decides to go straight into it, and he lets it fall totally on his face. And even the penultimate moments when he is jumping into the puddle and stomping, all the while keeping the rhythm going, really is really capturing the heart of what the song is. If you go back to some of the early versions of Singin' in the Rain, you can see in some of the Busby Berkeley portrayals, the song is sung by a whole chorus, and they're singing it extremely quick. They're singing it fast. The raindrops are coming. The beautiful dancing girls are showing their legs. But Kelly really, I believe, and I give him credit, despite his egotistical manner and other things that many people have noted, he touched it up and developed it. And I think there was something there that reminded me why, when I was a little boy, I would run around in the rain singing the same song. And my neighbors would complain. They would call my parents and say, "Why is your son rocking around our backyard?" Of course, I knew it was Debbie Reynolds, almost her first star turn, and she was only 19 years old. I was turned off by the relationship between Debbie and Gene Kelly. First of all, the age gap is obvious. And secondly, it's posited as a real relationship versus the Gene Hagen relationship that he has, which is only something that the studio movie magazines are trying to develop, but there really is no romance there. And this is a true romance that, they meet cute. He's jumping off of a streetcar. He lands in her car. And somehow they magically come together. They're in that rom-com like moment. On 25th viewing, I don't buy it. There's just something there where, and maybe part of it is Kelly's inability to emote. You always sense he's waiting for the line to come for him to do his shtick afterwards. He's never a real listener. Astaire, I think, had that capability in a much greater way. But it isn't just Kelly's egotism or vanity. I really believe there's just the actor and actresses don't really get along in the way they should. They're supposed to be a true, loving, growing relationship, as opposed to the fantasy, artificial one of him and Lena, Gene Hagen / Lena Lamont. And I really feel that Debbie Reynolds was, in a way, not served as well in this film. She said it was the hardest thing she did besides childbirth, because it took hours and hours, to film things, and she had to learn how to match the type of dancing moves of not only Gene Kelly, but we have to mention, and this, of course, I've noticed always, is Donald O'Connor. Now, Donald O'Connor, of course, had a very strong career in the 1950s, and he was really active into the 60s and 70s as well. And if you watch the film and you watch their dancing, you can see that O'Connor can match Kelly's moves. Not only can he match them, in many ways, he's even more fluid. Maybe it's because he's not burdened by that incredible upper body torso that Kelly had. He's much more lithe, more Astaire-like. I should mention, though, that the Kelly was extremely gracious in giving O'Connor the Make 'Em Laugh, which is considered one of the most incredible. It almost looks like it was done in a single take. Supposedly he spent 4 weeks in the hospital after he did this. The type of dancing on the walls and crashing through walls and fighting with the mannequin, all that type of stuff that O'Connor did, which really most people would say has not been matched. I think even Chaplin and Keaton and Lloyd would have stood up and applauded for 10, 15 minutes for what Donald O'Connor was able to do. There is I also had an appreciation this time for Millard Mitchell. I talked about Millard Mitchell before. He was the grumpy and realistic colonel in A Foreign Affair. He was also Richard Conte's erstwhile friend in Thieves Highway, and in this film he plays the head of the studio. And although his part is not necessarily showy, knowing his career and knowing that he was meant to be an everyman and to represent us all and an inherently good person, I think he ably abets the film in a way that I didn't notice up until this viewing, especially at the very end when he finally realizes that he's not going to let his star hold him hostage. And even though it might mean some threat to him as the head of the studio. So there's a little bit of a growth arc. Millard Mitchell he's like the Charvona. He gets an honorable mention, Zocher Latov. Why is the film on number 10 on Sight and Sound? Why is it considered above so many other important films? Is it because is it shallow? It's hard to say. I believe that it's almost like it goes down like candy, and yet there's something that you sense when you swallow it. I think what you're sensing is this is going to explain to you why you are coming to film. This is going to somehow explain that even though it goes through great lengths to expose the type of shtick that movies were made from, it punctures the wall of the soundstage. It makes you see that there's lip syncing happening. It makes you it openly says, yes, so much of what your fascination is really the tabloids wanting to work together with the studios to build interest. And yes, it doesn't come together in the snap of a finger the way you think it is. It's a lot of hard drudgery work till it happens. And yet, here's the final product. I don't mind showing you some of the kitchen. I don't mind showing you the way the meat looks chopped, because you're still going to love this product. I don't have to hide behind the fiction of as if we snapped our fingers, hey, let's put on a show, and it's already here. I think that's part of why the film has a lasting power. And even if the type of films you're going to are Avatar or Top Gun or other films that you hate musicals because it doesn't make any sense to you, this film is a joyful celebration of the movies themselves. And there's enough of a plot, there's enough of a story, there's enough of a aspect of drama, or at least and comedy together, that it works. I think that one of the most overlooked parts of the film for many people is when the silent actors need to go into the talkies. All of them get a crash course in elocution. And of course, Gene Hagen's character, it's really quite hilarious. Her attempts of saying words perfectly and properly, how she can't, for the life of her, ever expunge herself of the type of grub expressions that she was raised with. But even seeing Kelly having to go through it, and Comden and Green wrote a song especially for this film, which is called, Moses Supposes. And again, it really, in a way, sort of takes a wonderfully cute punch at elocution in general. About your favorite film, The Red Shoes, and it doesn't have anywhere of the drama or the quality of acting or the play within a play of The Red Shoes, but it does have a similar part. As you know, there's the Broadway melody part of the film. The piece of struggle that the film deals with is that they've made a costume drama that was sort of that was called The Dueling Cavalier. And it's so terrible that they have to turn it into a musical called The Dancing Cavalier. And they come up with it.
Starting to remind me of Attack of the Puppet People. I'm gonna have to go back to that when you're done.
They come up with an idea to change it into a musical, but it's actually a musical in a flashback. That it starts in a modern era, and a sandbag hits the head of the main character, who was reading A Tale of Two Cities and imagines a musical based on the French Revolution. But there's a modern part of the film too, and of course this was an excuse, just like in the film A Star Is Born, which was made a couple of years later. There's the scene Born in a Trunk where Judy Garland shows her husband, James Mason, Norman Maine, in the film, what they are doing, a special part of this new film. In the same way, in the middle of this Singing in the Rain, which really goes nowhere in terms of advancing the plot, Kelly does a number that he obviously directed along with Stanley Donen, about a young hoofer who comes to New York, gets involved with many George Raft lookalikes who are all flipping their coins, and a femme fatale for the ages, and really in a way that the censors had a very difficult time letting that section go, where Kelly and Sid Charisse engage in just this incredible series of types of dancing that really highlight the power of Sid Charisse. Now, Sid Charisse was always dubbed in her singing, but she never had to be dubbed for her dancing. She really was clearly, as in The Bandwagon, who she's with Astaire, Sid Charisse was, in a way, the incredible synthesis of ballet style with modern tap and other types of dancing. Again, not like Ann Miller, who was like a top and a power, but Sid Charisse was able to have the type of control, that the type of thing that Astaire controlled himself in the same way. So she's there for this 15-minute piece in the middle of the film, which is Kelly's character describing what he believes would be a great scene. It probably never makes it into the final scene because it's displayed in a way that was totally impossible to have been done in 1929. It's the type of thing that only the advancements of the 2 decades past that period were able to have such a scene happen. And have Kelly describing it. Well, he starts to, and then it fades into this incredible dance number with mostly done in pantomime, mostly right. It really is a piece that I always believed, but I always thought, what is it doing here? It really, and yet watching it again, I realized, what was happening. This was a means to sort of, at that point, dangle in front of the 1951 audience, we can still do this. There's still places that this medium can go to. And it built on the principles of the past, built on Busby Berkeley and others. There's things that we can do, especially with what we can do in terms of the camera work and the technique, that hopefully will keep you coming back. GM's poster film, even more than The Wizard of Oz, which a case can be made similarly, is a film that has not lost its edge. It's a film that people, I think, are still going back to see. Whereas I think a number of, the MGM greats, whether it's Gone with the Wind, The Greatest Show on Earth, many of the things that they award the great bald statuette to, I think most people, even if they could watch it at double speed, wouldn't really take the time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you are suffering from severe arthritis in your neck like I was, and you're coming off a bad cold, and the type of medicine is keeping you up, you could do a lot worse than spending the time watching and enjoying from beginning to end Singin in the Bert. We all know that in 1972, as Nixon's plumbers were breaking into the Watergate Hotel in order to find the type of goods that they needed to somehow bash George McGovern. We know that these guys were breaking into this hotel, and Yitzchak informs me that one of the reasons why they weren't at the top of their game was because, I guess, as some of them were involved in the actual nitty-gritty of the break-in, the lookout guy turned on the TV, and it seems like it was a Bert Gordon special that he was watching.
Yeah, it was Attack of the Puppet People.
Right. And he got so caught up in the story that he didn't notice that some of the alarms had gone off, right?
Yeah, he didn't see the police going, we're right outside, and he was supposed to call them to warn them if there were police outside, and instead he wanted to see how the movie ended. So that was
I see. So had it not been for the lasting power of Bert Gordon
and Susan, I guess, because she was she solved the case in the end.
So it could be had that not happened, it could be that Nixon and all his nefariousness would never have become public, and I guess we would have been treated to the complete second term of Tricky Dick.
Probably would have been much better off, I think.
But you never know. There might not have been, who knows? Maybe Reagan would never have come to office.
Yeah,
hard to say.
Reagan, who Susan Gordon worked with. So.
Yes, I guess we might have Spiro Agnew on one of our Gordon Liddy. Once Gordon Liddy had to spend some time behind bars, he realized that the system needed to be revamped. So that's it, my friends. Watch your step on the way out. Take care. Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.